to this computer. There you go.
All right. David Bachner, welcome. Thank you for coming on board, and it's all yours.
Thank you. I'm just hitting the got it icon. My permission to be recorded, I guess. Anyway, well, thank you, Bill, and good morning again, everybody. It really is a pleasure to be here. I've heard a lot about Suncoast Writers Guild from my friends, neighbors, Carrie Brunswick and Harry Barnes. I spend summers in upstate New York, and so does Harry. And so does Carrie. And this year, Carrie's spending winter in upstate New York, and I know he'd much rather be down there in Florida with some of you. Anyway, my thanks to Harry, even though I know he's not here today, couldn't be with us today, and I thank him for recommending me to Bill as a presenter, and thank you, Bill, for eventually inviting me and organizing the event. And I know we've been through some back and forth because of events that have so impacted a number of your members. And as I said earlier, I really do hope for your communities to recover very, very soon. And those of you who have been individually affected, I really hope it goes well from this point on. Enough said. Well, when I asked Harry what members might be interested in, he suggested that I talk about the process I go through in writing. So that will be my focus today. And when I asked Bill about members' interests, Bill anticipated that today's group would be a mix of poets and prose writers, and he suggested that I offer a mixed poetry-prose approach. So I'll take that approach. I hope I didn't misrepresent you, Bill, in what you suggested. That's how
Not
I
at all.
recall it. Okay.
You're spot on.
And Bill also suggested that I leave time for questions and discussion, which I certainly intend to do. I figure, what I've prepared would take about 45 minutes. I hope that's not going to overly test your patience, but then whatever time remains, we can just open it up. So let me start with some background. Bill was kind to say some things about my background, but I want to add the acknowledgement that I haven't published much poetry or fiction. So I'm joining you today as a relative newcomer in those regards. I'll have to also say that I have been writing for 60 years, and my writing has taken various forms: grants writing, academic writing, fiction, poetry, memoir. I started writing poetry in college in the 60s, mentored by the poet John Tagliabue. And parenthetically, I should note that after college, I took a 50-year break from writing poetry before joining a workshop in New York 5 years ago, led by the poet Robert Benson. And by the way, Bob just published a wonderful collection, 300 pages of his poetry. And it's Bright Hill Press and Literary Center of the Catskills that both Harry and Carrie are familiar with. And if any of you come across that book, it's really great. It's called What Lightning Spoke. I think that's the title of it. So anyway, I'm going to come back to this history with that workshop and poetry a bit later. After graduate school in the 70s, I concentrated on grants writing, contract proposals, and technical reports for think tanks in Washington, D.C. And in the 30 years between, say, the mid-1980s until 2015, my focus was on academic writing, including journals and several books in the fields of intergroup relations and international education, as Bill mentioned. Throughout those 30 years, and this is an important point for me, at night and on weekends, I really never stopped writing stories. And it was during those 30 years that I developed what would become Kerensky's Life and Times, a novel that was published in 2021. And I think the novel is a good place to start this conversation. And in doing so, I'd like to introduce reintroduce, since I think you've all seen it already, the central theme of my comments today, the borderland between autobiography and imagination. That often indeterminate space between the narrative of remembered experience and fiction. The epigraph I used for my novel, I think, captures the essence of this theme very well. It also captures the essence of what I'm trying to do as a writer of both prose and poetry. It's from Frederick Reichen's 2000 novel, The Lost Legends of New Jersey, if any of you are familiar with that. If not, I recommend it. I quote now from that book. "There is no way I can tell you everything, though I'd like to. One of the problems with all stories is they have borders. Then you extrapolate, like in algebra. You use the things you know to guess at what is left outside the border." I think the quote is worth repeating, and it's short, so I will. "There is no way I can tell you everything, though I'd like to. One of the problems with all stories is they have borders. Then you extrapolate, like in algebra. You use the things you know to guess at what is left outside the border." So how specifically does the Reichen quote relate to my novel? In 1980, I was visiting my parents in my hometown of Belmar on the New Jersey shore. Strolling along the boardwalk, I ran into Marty, a high school classmate I hadn't seen in 15 years. Marty was a brilliant guy, a working class kid who, because of his brilliance, was literally plucked out of Asbury Park High School, where we were both students, and sent to Phillips Andover Academy on a full scholarship. Then he went on to Harvard for his bachelor's, master's, and PhD, all with highest honors. His dissertation was published as a book. He taught at a couple of big name universities, and then I lost track of him until that day by the ocean in 1980. "So what are you up to these days?" I asked him. "Still teaching at UCLA? How many more books have you published?" "I don't teach anymore," Marty answered, "or write, or work. I live in a boarding house near the ocean and spend all my time playing pinball." Then we parted. That was it. I thought my friend was strangely upbeat, considering his circumstances. And I started thinking, could it have been a put on? But then I didn't think so. And if what he told me was true, I really found it inexplicable. So the mystery of how Marty's life had come to this weird state began to gnaw at me. Eventually, I'd say it really consumed me. I started to write a story, working on it at night, on weekends, even between meetings at work. It went through numerous versions over the 40 years from the day I ran into Marty until 2021, when it appeared as the first chapter of my novel. I'm going to read the opening 2 pages of the novel here to set the stage for our theme. Again, the borderland between autobiography and imagination. These 2 pages will introduce Nathan Korinsky, the novel's main protagonist. These pages also introduce another key protagonist, what I think of as the novel's contextual protagonist, the New Jersey shore. So this is, as I said, the first 2 pages, and it's the first chapter is titled Royal Flush, which I'll anticipate things as the name of a pinball machine. Nathan dreams dreams that are lavish with lights and sirens. They are machine dreams, crowded with screws and electromagnetics and buzzers and flashers. They are his happiness in the night, and it is a curse of wakefulness that he must let them go. One buzzer sounds now for an inordinately long time. Monotonous and insistent, It pulls him from the rhythm of his dreaming. The lights and sirens fade. Furious, he bellows himself awake and smashes the offending alarm clock against the headboard. Baby Ben falls to the floor and ticks its last at 1:30 p.m. on Friday, the 20th of June, 1980. Nathan is jubilant at the destruction, at having struck an instinctive and telling blow against intrusion. His action stimulates him. He feels courageous, a man with ambition and plans. Still lying in bed, he formulates a schedule for the day. First he'll eat, then he'll go to the arcades, then shit, it's Friday. He has to go to his parents' house for the Sabbath, where the food will be good, but the arguments and criticisms of him tire him. Yet going there is unavoidable. So redo the schedule, first eat, then the arcades, then back here to rest and clean up before going to his parents. From there, back to the arcades until bedtime. Kerensky likes this plan. It accommodates both his needs and his obligations. He rolls from his back to his side, preparatory to putting his feet on the floor. 4 inches from his face, he sees a hair. He picks it up, brings it to his mouth, bites down, and pulls a tight curl of it through his teeth. His groin tingles as he envisions the source of the hair. Abruptly, he puts on his glasses and lumbers to the floor, kicking his way through deposits of paper and clothing until his foot finds the telephone. He dials. The phone rings a long time before he hangs up. Disconsolate, he resumes chewing the small hair, plucked the night before from the pudendum of Esther O'Connell. Without a time for Esther, today's schedule is imperfect after all. 20 minutes and 2 glazed donuts later, disconsolate still, but reviving, he leaves his Ocean Grove garret and heads south along the boardwalk into Bradley Beach. New Jersey, Nathan once wrote as part of an article for his life for the Harvard Crimson, is among the most maligned places in the United States. Images of the state are indeed harsh. For the outsider, the very name New Jersey is enough to conjure up some horrific vision of the turnpike, replete with the odor of Secaucus pig tanneries, diesel trucks that swallow up careless Volkswagens and Toyotas, sunsets refracted through multiple layers of chemical pollutants, and people with ugly accents living in proximate dense colonies, much in the manner of insects. Strange fears accompany these visions, fears, for example, of getting a flat tire and having to brave the certainty of foul air and the likelihood of assault by hooligans who hide like trolls in the pox, noxious culverts. People must believe that pride of place is totally absent in New Jersey, unlike, say, in Oregon, New Mexico, California, New England, even in New York or Ohio. People must believe, too, that one resides in New Jersey only because fate conspired to see one there at birth, or because one's company is located there, or because some other sad event beyond one's control left one gulping killer fumes in the ironically nicknamed Garden State. So much of this prattle is unfair, more a consequence of stereotype than fact. There are enclaves in the state that are fascinating for their history, scenery, and local color. One such area, known to detractors and supporters alike as the Shore, is the line of communities that stretches along the Atlantic from Sandy Hook in the north to Cape May in the south. Within a 6-mile section of this line lies the heart of the Shore, which incorporates the towns of Asbury Park, Ocean Grove, Bradley Beach, Avon by the Sea, Belmar, and Spring Lake. The towns are contiguous, and for the outsider, it is difficult to tell where one ends and another begins. When one becomes familiar with the towns, however, they are as different as 6 countries. They are unique, like pearls in a necklace, each with its precious irregularity, the decaying Coney Island atmosphere of Asbury Park, the evangelical influence of Ocean Grove, the multicultural mix of Bradley Beach, the stable affluence of Spring Lake and Avon, and the fishing fleet summer rental economy of Belmar. These are varied places, memorable places, exciting and inspiring places. For those of you who may have been laboring under misconceptions about the state, I commend these attractions. As for those of you who were fortunate enough to have grown up at the shore, I cannot do other than predict that we shall at one time or another be drawn back. It is a place for returning and settling in. True to his predictions, he's back. Nathan Korinsky, Belmar Grammar School, Asbury Park High School, Exeter Academy, bachelor's, master's, and PhD in philosophy from Harvard, fast-rising professorial star at his Ivy League alma mater, legendary teacher, popular speaker, and lauded author. But his impressive trajectory took a dramatic nosedive in 1978 when he was denied tenure. His confidence shattered, outraged but helpless against Harvard's opaque promotion process, he resigned his position, soured forever at age 34 by the very idea of academia. After a year on a commune, a failed marriage, a 5,000-mile separation from his daughter, and only temporarily recuperative sojourns in Israel and Hawaii, he rethought his options and settled on two: returning to the Jersey Shore and devoting himself to Gottlieb's Royal Flush, a pinball machine. So, a key reason that I became so obsessed with trying to understand the real-life Marty story through the imagined life of my character Nathan was its overlap with my life. Growing up on the Jersey Shore, going to some of the same schools, experiencing the same cultural influences, cherishing pinball as youngsters, leaving home for higher education, including graduate degrees and jobs in academia. But then came this baffling difference in our two lives' trajectories. With some detours along the way, I stayed the conventional course. Marty dropped out of the race entirely. Our biographies had coincided until our early 30s, then diverged radically. Marty's story, despite or perhaps because of its incomprehensibility, was to me the far more intriguing story. I kept imagining the course of his life beyond what I wrote in the pinball story. So basically, what began as a 25-page story in 1980 became a 380-page novel by 2021. Along the way, I deepened my exploration of the fictional Nathan's life and mentality. I also amplified his personal dramas with the interacting dramas of other characters, including the several who had made cameo appearances in the short story, as well as a number of other characters I created later. And importantly, in the events and dramas of all my characters' lives, I began to recognize echoes and connections with the events and dramas of my life. In other words, I began to see that the characters I was imagining were based increasingly on things I had experienced, were tied in effect to episodes in my life story. So there was this kind of character-author reciprocity. The more deeply I explored my characters, the more deeply I encountered myself. I can also flip that statement to say, the more deeply I encountered myself, the more deeply I was able to explore my characters. Here's an example. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Korea, as Bill said, from 1966 to 1968, teaching middle school and high school English. Before going in country, I did practice teaching in a rural school on the Big Island of Hawaii. Now let me connect this for a moment back to the fictional Nathan. After leaving academia, following many travels and adventures, Nathan married a mail carrier in New Jersey, but he still loves teaching, so he volunteers to tutor at-risk kids. This episode from the novel, which I'll read now, shows Nate working with a student. It's based on a situation I faced in Hawaii. Let me get the book back out. Esther was his second wife's name, by the way. Esther and I had everything we needed, an adequate combined income, excellent government benefits, and, but for the continuing sadness of my separation from Ellen, my daughter, and my parents, a lifestyle largely free of stress. A year into our marriage, I found an additional source of satisfaction as a volunteer teaching elementary schools to read and tutoring at-risk teenagers in whatever subjects they were failing. I had always enjoyed teaching and was glad to see that I was still good at it. That these kids weren't philosophy students at Harvard didn't lessen in the least the sense of satisfaction I got from working with them. My experience with Nolan Jameson was especially gratifying, although our tutoring sessions started out badly. Please come in, I called in answer to a knock on the door of the room that was reserved for volunteers at the high school. It was 7 p.m. on a warm Tuesday evening in early June. I had worked late that day and hadn't had a chance to shower at home and change out of my mail carrier's uniform. A tall, muscular teenager walked in and sat down across the table from me, although I was standing and extending my hand, which he didn't take. Shit, stinks in here like a damn gym. I seated myself slowly, trying not to react to his rudeness. Yeah, well, sorry, it was a hot day for delivering mail, and I didn't have a chance to clean up before I got here. What the hell? So how's a mailman going to help me pass English? How's a mailman supposed to teach me literature? I wasn't always a mailman, and if I had always been one, what makes you think I wouldn't know about literature? I said, mimicking his sarcasm. Anyway, I'm not the one failing English, you are. So if you're still interested in learning something, I suggest we start again. My name is Nathan Korinsky, I said, standing up and offering my hand across the table. And you are? He glared at me for a moment, but then stood up and took my hand. Nolan Jameson. I thought we would be okay, but he stayed sullen and aggressive. How are you going to teach me, man? This English stuff they have they have us read. It's for fags, man. Especially the poetry. God, I hate that shit. It don't make no sense. And why in the hell would I ever want to learn stuff that ain't going to get me nowhere? That's got nothing to do with my life. What do you want to do after high school, Nolan? Assuming you can pass this course and graduate. For the first time, he seemed to let his guard down and show some animation that wasn't negative. The military, I'm going to be a soldier or a Marine. That's what I want my career to be. And the recruiter told me if that's what I want for a career, I'd have a leg up if I graduated. Dropouts don't usually get too far. That's what he told me. So that's why I'm here. And that's why I want to know how you're going to teach me. I'm from Belmar and graduated from Asbury High back in the 60s, just before our country got involved in Vietnam. I went on to college and graduate school. Like I said, I wasn't always a mailman. Anyway, I had a buddy back then, a friend from Belmar, who went to Manasquan High. They were our big rivals, but we stayed friends. His name was Bobby Shannon. Nolan came alive. Bobby Shannon? The Bobby Shannon? I nodded, pleased to see that Bobby's name was still recognized locally 20 years after he was selected New Jersey's top scholastic athlete 2 years in a row for his accomplishments in football and track and field. He's still my dad's hero. He's always talking about all the stuff that dude could do, all his records. I do the same field events Shannon did, shot put and discus, and play tight end like he did, and I'm good. But no way I'm as good as Bobby Shannon was. My dad says he could have been all pro, but my dad doesn't know what happened to him. You say you're still friends. What happened? I agree with your father. Bobby could have been a big-time sports star. He could have gone on to college with an athletic scholarship, but he never had much interest in school. He always wanted to join the army to serve his country like you. So he enlisted and ended up being one of the early Green Beret advisors in Vietnam. No shit. What happened to him? He left the service as a master sergeant and with a Silver Star after doing 2 tours in Nam. He and I corresponded during those years. I still have his letters. I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I shared them with you. Maybe you could even have your own correspondence with him. I could ask him. The guardedness returned to Nolan's face. Why would you do that for me? You said you want to go in the service, and Bobby might have some advice to offer about that. But the bigger reason is that I think you might reevaluate your attitude about literature under Bobby's influence. And why would I do that? The letters from him that I want to share with you are mostly poetry, beautifully written poetry about his experiences in Vietnam. The writing is clear as a bell and powerful and hard to read sometimes because of the violence he encountered, both in the battles he fought against the enemy and within himself. Poetry, Bobby told me, was a big factor in helping him get through the war, in helping him to make some sense of it all. Are you game to read it? If you are, I bet it will give you a whole new perspective on the material we'll be working on together for your course. Nolan thought for a moment. Yeah, I'm game. Good. I'll contact Bobby and ask his permission to share his letters with you and to see if he's willing to correspond with you. We spent the rest of that first meeting reviewing Nolan's required reading list and how we would proceed in our tutoring sessions. As he got up to leave, he asked me what Bobby Shannon did after he left the service. He went on to college and became a coach and teacher at a high school in Oregon. He teaches English literature. So that's just one example among many in the novel of the link between autobiography and imagination, between my quote unquote real world of lived experience and the fictional world I created. And I have no evidence, going back to Marty, that tenure denial led to the real life Marty's radical life shift, although it does seem like a plausible explanation for his having dropped out to play pinball. But in terms of the novel, does this really matter? Nathan, albeit inspired by Marty, is a fictional character. So whether his invented life tracks with anything other than my vision of him is irrelevant. Factuality might spur imagination, but imagination is in no way beholden to matters of fact. There are no stipulations or constraints when it comes to imagination. At least it seems so to me. So I want to briefly mention 3, call them literary influences, which were important in the process of writing Perinsky's Life and Times, and which also reinforce the autobiography-imagination theme. The first was Peter Taylor's novel, In the Tennessee Country, and specifically this excerpt. In the Tennessee country of my forebears, it was not uncommon for a man of good character suddenly to disappear. He might be a young man or a middle-aged man, or even sometimes a very old man. Whatever the case, few questions were ever asked. Rather, it was generally assumed that such a man had very likely felt the urging of some inner compulsion. Like the banker in Nashville, who left the office in the middle of one afternoon without so much as taking his hat and cane, and whose whereabouts would not be known by anyone in Nashville for more than 25 years. It really frightened me to think how much I identified with him and how happily I pictured in my mind the place where he might now be living. It even occurred to me that I might someday wish to make a move for myself. and I doubted even then I would find the energy, the motivation, the courage it would require. So after my encounter with Marty, I wondered a lot about the idea of disappearing. Like Taylor's narrator, I would never find the energy, the motivation, the courage required. But Marty, like Taylor's banker, had apparently found what it took. And it was Marty's dropping out that evolved into the fictional Nathan's series of disappearances. And there's a lot about disappearing throughout the novel. I think because I also began to recognize those periods of my life when I would have loved to disappear. Unlike Nathan and Marty, though, yet much like Nathan's twin brother, Arnold, the novel's other main character, I chose the more expected, conscientious, and dutiful road of career, family, security. Increasingly, my own story became the launching pad for imagining the fictional Arnold, Nathan's fraternal twin brother, who ended up looking a lot like me. And I'll come back to that in a minute. A second significant influence on my book's development was Hermann Hesse's famous novel, Narcissus and Goldmund. The novel's two eponymous main characters are profound friends, but with deeply antithetical perspectives. Goldmund is an artist driven by the impulses of his heart and his passion for life, to whatever heights and depths that passion might take him. Narcissist is the opposite, a cloistered, arid cleric driven by his intellect and reason. Still, they are friends. Still, they empathize despite their different natures, just as I could imagine and empathize with both Nathan and Arnold. Also, my original short story had focused almost entirely on Nathan. So in order to keep my novel from becoming monochromatic, I wanted to build in a Hess-inspired tension by expanding Nathan's polar opposite brother Arnold into the novel's co-star. The novel's brief prologue gives an initial glimpse into the essential differences between the two brothers. The prologue is entitled 1946, the year the fictional Kerensky family moved from the Bronx to the Jersey Shore. The same year, I should note, that my family made the same move. Prologue, 1946. Nathan Kerensky, age 2, toddles south along the boardwalk in Belmar, New Jersey. Behind him, his mother pushes a stroller holding Nathan's brother, Arnold, who has not yet learned to walk. Nathan's birth preceded Arnold's by 4 minutes and 8 seconds, a fairly good head start in proportional immediate postnatal terms, but hardly enough to account for the many differences already apparent between them. Nathan, stop, their mother yells, worried that he is getting too far ahead. I mean it, Nathan, right now. Nathan only goes faster. This is Arnold's first and longest abiding memory. Nathan in the lead, Arnold coming along behind, following this person destined to inspire and trouble him the most. This person he will always love the most. The third influence, while I was writing Kerensky's Life and Times, was this quote from the Coma Pueblo poet Simon Ortiz. There are no truths, Ortiz writes, only stories. I often have this dictum in mind as I developed the novel's other main characters. The Kerensky's parents, Nathan's 2 wives, Holly and Esther, his daughter Ellen, Arnold's occasional lover, Sinaya, and several more. I tried to heighten the novel's drama by giving these characters moments to provide their own stories and points of view within the novel's main story, the main story being Nathan and Arnold's relationship. So I hope I'm not going too long here. I think you said I had enough time. Okay, because I wanted to turn to poetry now. Earlier, I mentioned that I took a 50-year break from poetry after college until I joined Robert Benson's workshop 5 or 6 years ago in upstate New York. Here's a poem that speaks to my renewed association with poetry. It's called Starting Over, and it's also the prologue to this new book that Bill mentioned. Just there. Okay, starting over. You disappointed her, my daughter said, repeating what her mother, my first wife, had given as the reason for our failed marriage. Well, of course, I jumped in, uncomfortable with the topic, or else she wouldn't have left. She wanted to travel, to live in exotic places, like I had before we met. Instead, she got a salaryman, a householder, an administrator who prioritized work, career, security. My daughter cut me off. Please let me finish. Word for word, Mom said, he disappointed me. When I met him, he had the soul of a poet. Somewhere along the way, he lost that. The poet was gone. I wish I could talk with her mother, who died several years ago. I wish I could tell her the poet is back and writing every day. I wish I could tell her that I'm trying. So what do you write about? I imagine she would ask. And why? This, I would answer, gesturing like an actor at the world around us. This world and my life in it, the look of it, its sounds and feel, to capture all that has happened in all the places I've been. Really? Is that why you write? She would challenge me, her trust in my motives long since abandoned. Yes, I would tell her, for that, and to recover the soul you said I lost, the soul you said you loved. Like starting over, many of the poems I've written since I returned to poetry are autobiographical. If anything, they're more strictly autobiographical and less imaginative than my prose. Both tell a story, but the prose, the fiction, is far more apt to go beyond my lived experience than my poems, which remain quite literal. They're mostly told in the first person and express things as they happen, things as I see and feel and remember them in particular times and places. The title of my new book of poems, Just Then, Just There, reflects this emphasis on time and place. The volume's 62 poems are essentially stories that follow an autobiographical arc from childhood to the present and are variously situated in Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and America. I'll read 4 very short pieces from the book, just as examples. And I'm doing these according to the chronology, the autobiographical chronology, childhood up through the present day. So the first poem recalls a moment from childhood. It's titled Numbers. I would see Larry Berkowitz once a week when my mother took me shopping to the kosher butcher shop in our town. Mr. Berkowitz was a strong-looking man, short, muscular, and he was very nice to me. Hello, Boychik, he would say. He would say more, but I couldn't understand his Yiddish or his English. Like my Russian Bubby Mirel, she was nice too. Like Mr. Berkowitz, but I couldn't understand her either. Customers took a number from the roll of tickets Mr. Berkowitz kept near the door. Number 3, Mr. Berkowitz called out one day. 2 pounds of ground beef, please, my mother said as she and I approached the counter, and a ½ pound of tongue in a separate package. Yes, missus, I get it for you. When Mr. Berkowitz handed her the 2 packages, the sleeve of his shirt inched up, and I noticed a row of blue numbers tattooed on his forearm. He saw me staring and started to say something. Number 4, he yelled instead, looking away. Next is number 4. The second of the 4 poems is called Winter, Korea, 1967. This poem was inspired by an event during my Peace Corps experience in Korea, and it's written in a traditional Korean verse form called the shijo, which in Korean is comprised of 45 syllables per stanza, a number I try to stay close to in English. There are other technicalities involved in shijo, but I'll skip that explanation for now. And this poem is actually two linked shijo. Winter, Korea, 1967. We rode the train north 10 hours that day. It slid like a snake up the long spine of land, past clusters of huts with snow on straw roofs, past rice fields and hills and woods glazed in ice. We watched an old man crouched nude by the tracks as we went through the outskirts of Seoul. And that same night on Namsan, remember how we climbed those perilous paths, drunk after some party in Itaewon, how we barreled back down the slopes, yelling, falling, then rolling into that playground. Lying there, you said the city's lights were stars. So 10 years later is when this third poem takes place. I spent time in the Middle East, and the poem is titled Just Then in 1977. Guns and random stops, checkpoints with border police demanding my papers as I rode decrepit West Bank buses, my senses wired from diesel fumes, blaring Arab music, jousting jalopies careening through chaotic streets, angry graffiti and defaced images on crumbling walls, Star of David splashed red, Menachem Begin with horns. Yet I was unconcerned just then, because Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, an unlikely peacemaker, had come to Jerusalem, bringing hope that Palestinians and Israelis, fratricidal siblings for biblical eons and Quranic centuries, might join again at Abrahamic roots and unfurl two flags in amity against their shared Mediterranean sky. In the blissful expectations of that moment, I would spend Hebron afternoons sharing water pipes with the old warrior Mustafa in his market stall, looking at photos going back past the British into the last years of Ottoman rule. And I would have encounters like the one in a Nablus alley, when the young activist Mohammed's frown became a smile as I ignored his hostile eyes and greeted him in Arabic. Please take this cigarette, he said, then asked before lighting it, Israeli? No, American. Christian? No, Jew. But still, he lit my cigarette with his, and we smoked them down together until the embers met our skin. Okay, the last of the four is closer to the current age, and it took place in France and Spain. It's called Cadaqués. Do you remember Cadaqués? That time we drove down from Versailles, all those hours past Nantes, Bordeaux, and Toulouse, through the Dordogne and over the Pyrenees because France was too expensive. Dinners in Paris had been all pizza, small poultry pies far from the Champs-Élysées and other grand boulevards. We saved for espresso and wine, not food. But Spain was cheap, so there we went, towards Girona and Figueres and Rosas, then down a perilous road to the Cap de Creus, unrelenting Catalan drivers on our tail, terrorizing us until we reached Cadaqués, that white, dazzling town of young Picasso and old Dali, where the sun and beaches gave us what we needed, warmth and water and the Hotel Blaumar, with its quiet blue pool and no other guests because the Germans would not come south before their Baltic winter. We walked and swam there daily until siesta, then wandered along the harbor and through the shops before dinner, eating sea fennel and fish stew, spider crab rice and sponge cake with brandy, eating as if Paris had never been an obstacle to our nourishment. So I'll sum up by saying that as I reflect on my writing process, 5 choice points are involved in both my poetry and prose as I navigate this frontier between autobiography and imagination. The first choice point, what story do I want to tell? Which experience, which event, which feeling, which interaction do I want to explore? Secondly, in which place and time is the story situated? What room, street, town, country, decade? The third choice point, which voice or voices tell the story? Thinking back to that quote by Simon Ortiz, there are no truths, only stories. Whose truth? Whose story is the focus? Fourthly, which form best serves the story? I mean, the choices seem infinite. I know they're not, but they seem infinite. I mean, flash fiction, short story, novel, creative nonfiction, memoir. Do you write in paragraphs, poetic lines, blank verse, free verse, sonnets, villanelle, pantoum? What form best serves the story? Fifthly, and last, what level of detail will I employ? Some subjects are more amenable to abstraction, I think, to conceptualization. Others need to be more tactile, visceral. This is tricky. I'm reminded of the adage, show, don't tell, which is often taken as gospel in writers' workshops, etc., until you read a book like Paul Auster's marvelous novel 4321, which has far more tell than show in its 900 pages. And speaking of Auster, I'll end with this quote from another Paul Auster novel, Moon Palace. This seems to me like an appropriate conclusion for the theme, the borderland between autobiography and imagination. I quote, I tried to use my own experiences as the scaffolding for what I wrote. And even when the material pushed me into rather far-flung and abstract territory, the writing was a subterranean version of my own life story. Well, thank you for listening, and I welcome your questions, comments and discussion. Thank you.
Silent cheer there, I guess, as we have everybody on mute. Thank you, David. Appreciate it very much. Deborah, you have a comment?
I do. David, I am just, as writers, like we all are, I often struggle with how much to tell because I don't want it to be monotonous. And it feels like I've learned a lot listening to yours, because it feels to me like you tell just the right amount to keep you wondering and keep it interesting without losing you, I guess is what I'm saying. Very nice.
Well, thank you, Deborah. I appreciate you saying that. It's that particular issue, as I said, I think in my comments, I said it's tricky. For me, it's a real challenge. And I know, I think I was so used to being a discursive writer because of, academia.
Yes.
And then when I started sharing my stories, particularly with this friend, you may have read some of her work. Carrie and Harry know her. She lives in upstate New York, and she also lives part of the year in Florida, north of you, in the Panhandle. But basically, her name is Jenna Howard, and she wrote Night Navigation, among other books. And when I was developing my novel, Jenna gave me some really valuable critiques kind and hard hitting at the same time. And she kept drilling into me, don't summarize so much. Try to
Yeah.
tell the story in the detail that the story deserves. And so I started experimenting more with doing that. And then that was reinforced by poetry, because poetry, it
Yes.
seems to me, really invites, this detail. So, trying to find that balance, though, is always quite interesting. But thank you, Deborah, for your comment.
You're welcome. Very nice.
I saw somebody else said, Anne, did you have your hand up? Yeah.
I did. I just wanted to say, when you first began reading, I knew you were a poet because the poetic influence of your cadence and your words came through to me. And I found that very interesting and delightful. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Anne.
Is there a point at some point, I know people were taking notes, I'm not that fast a writer, that you could give us a list of the books that you referred to and a summary of the 5 points? Because
Sure.
I think I would like to really revisit that. And
Sure.
it's in my
Yeah.
head now, but will it be in a half an hour? Probably not. So
Sure.
if you can do that, I would really appreciate it. Pam has
Yeah, I
probably
can.
got it all done because she's such a great secretary.
Yeah, I'll do that. I can send those to you, Bill. Is that the way
That's
I would
fine,
do that?
sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Happy to.
Thank you so much.
Pam?
Yes, Pam. Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering, David, if on the 4th poem that you wrote or that you
Mhm.
read to us, how do you spell that poem's name?
Cada case.
Yes.
Yeah. It's spelled capital C A D A Q U E S, and there's an accent grave over the E, cada case.
Thank
And
you.
you're welcome.
Denise?
Denise, hi.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. A couple years ago, the Dolly Museum in St. Pete had an exhibit of photography and Dolly's paintings from that region of Spain, and it was truly amazing to go see. And I'm blanking out on his name right now, but the really famous Florida photographer who does all the nature photography, I'm forgetting his name right now, but it was his, they sent him on a photographic journey to document those places. And it was, you might be able to find something about that on the website for the Dolly Museum in St. Petersburg.
I think, I mean, the town that I think you're referring to is literally right next door to Cadaqués. It's the Cap de, I don't know if it's the Cap de Creus or what I can't remember the name now, but where Dali spent a whole lot of time and where he did a lot of certainly his later work. So I'm familiar with the museum that you're referring to, but I do need to revisit some of that. So thanks.
It was very interesting to hear your work about that place because I had seen these images of it. And I do think the place you mentioned was also one of the places the photographer visited. So.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area. It's just gorgeous. And I mentioned too in my comments, or rather in the poem itself, about being tailgated by by the Catalan drivers. And when you go down, the Cadaqués is right on the water, and you have to go down this very, very steep descent from the main roads. And it takes about, I don't know, depending on how fast you drive, but say a half hour. And it's all switchback roads. And in Spain, they drive really fast, and so trying to do that was When I said I was being terrorized by Catalan drivers, that's what it felt like. Yes, please, Cheryl.
Denise, did you mean Clyde Butcher, the photographer?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Always handy to have an iPad near you.
Thanks,
Brain
Cheryl.
just went blank. Thanks, Cheryl.
Ed,
Hey, Ed. Yes.
Yeah, I think in any attempt to do something autobiographical, you run into the brick wall of embarrassment, depending on what your life has been like.
Like Prince Harry, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why you fictionalize it, Ed. That's why you
So
fictionalize it.
maybe that's when the border into you cross that border into imagination and kind of temper some of that embarrassment. You don't have to eliminate it, but maybe downplay it a little bit.
Yeah, and also I think that's absolutely true, and you can also, you know, invent and reinvent things, and the danger there is, you know, like misrepresenting the essence of what you're trying to depict. It's interesting. I mean, the process, I mean, I never wrote a novel before. I mean, the process of doing it was, you know, painful and exhilarating and all sorts of things. And because of those kinds of choices and, you know, what do I stay true to? Whom do I stay true to? You know, sometimes it's true to my own experience, but sometimes it's staying true to this invented character, in this case, Nathan or Arnold. You know, it's really quite interesting. I don't know if I have it in me to try another novel, but I might. Yeah,
Go ahead,
hi,
Denise.
Have you ever tried the National Novel Writing Month Challenge? That's been on my mind to see if I can do something like that. Just for
I never have. I don't. You know, it's coming to all of this kind of late. And I mentioned early on, you know, acknowledge that I'm pretty new to these ideas of publishing. It not in the academic sense, but in the creative sense. And you know, I think I'm a little, I don't know, a little frightened by the process of submission. And so I've got to get over that.
I
I wish you, I wish you
share
luck.
that. I'm with you there. That's an idea, Bill, for a group we might want to have, people who are submitting, a little group to share our experiences. I'm definitely in that camp. I have my first completed book, and it's languishing in the publication process because I find it hard to approach it. And I've published other things before, but they've been articles and in magazines, and I've just never published a book before.
Well, and as I understand it, even for, you know, published and well-published, you know, novelists, if that previous novel didn't sell enough, it's kind of hard to get the next one out, you know, through a publisher. At least that's what I understand. And I guess that's one incentive for more and more self-publishing.
A lot of avenues you can take these days, without question.
Yeah.
Any other? Go ahead, Bob.
No, go ahead, Deanna.
I want to thank you. Thank you very much, David, for
You're
your
welcome, Deanna.
presentation. It was extremely thoughtful, well thought out, and wove well into all the dynamic pieces that you wanted to include. And it really helped me with my process of writing poetry to consider some of the things in more detail than I have in the past. So it gave me a framework, a larger, expanded framework to work out of. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the comment. And Bob?
Yeah. So David, you and I have way too much in common. Maine, New York, New Jersey, Japan, academia. So anyhow, but I I write exactly.
Poor Bob.
Yes. I write fictionalized autobiography, but I vary how much of it tells about myself. And I write short story. And I vary how much it tells about myself based on what Ed is saying, is how embarrassing it is. And sometimes in my short fiction, I'll even go as far as to use my real name. So it depends on the story, how much I want to reveal about myself. And it's a well-trodden path. I mean, if you think about Philip Roth and Nathan Zuckerman as his character, right? That's just him. And you know, he's doing fictionalized autobiography. I also agree with what you said about location. Review of one of my stories once said that I treated my location as if it was another character. And I do think that I liked your term, contextual protagonist. I thought that was a very good term, and I'm going to steal that. And I also liked your choice parts, and that may tempt me to try a novel, because now I know about those inflection points. It might be a good way. So I want to thank you for your living a better version of my life. Thank you. Good job there. Like you and Jimmy Buffett both. Basically, I thought it was a wonderful presentation, David. Thank you very much. And I saw a lot of things that I could do better after listening to your presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. Also, it seems to me that there must be something, you mentioned Philip Roth, there must be something in the New Jersey water that incentivizes us to do that sort of thing.
I also think it's something in being Jewish, and I don't really know how to explain it, but there's something in being Jewish about overanalyzing the decisions you've made in life and reflecting back on them, at least in Jewish authors, because they seem to do it a lot. I'm sick of it myself, but I still do it. You know, I think there's something in that reflection on decisions that you've made, whether they be location or career choice or, you know, even personal relationships. So again, like I said, I saw way too much of myself in your superior writing and decision making. Thank you.
You're welcome. I guess the lesson is don't study too much Talmud.
Or any at all. In my
Or any
case.
at all.
Anybody else? Deanna?
Yeah, I'd like to say one more thing, which is when you talk, David, about everything being, when it comes right down to it, autobiographical. I also paint, and it's also said that every painting is autobiographical also, and that you have your own natural marks and rhythms that appear on the canvas or the paper. And so that's autobiographical too. I think every creative venture has some element of that in it.
I think that I would agree with that. And I should also mention that when I quoted Paul Auster in Moon Palace, which is one of his earlier novels, or maybe mid-career novels, I can't remember, probably from about 30 years ago. But the protagonist in Moon Palace is a character named Marco Fogg. And even though I read this in relation to writing, my memory is that Marco Fogg was talking about things in relation to painting. And so when he mentions, I tried to use my own experiences as the scaffolding for what I wrote, I think that also in the novel applied to what he painted. And then when the material pushed me into rather far-flung and abstract territory, the writing or the painting he saw as a subterranean version of his own life story. So, I mean, it's that, I think what you're saying, it certainly rings a bell for me, even though I'm not a painter. My mother was, but I'm not. I think there was one other hand. Did I miss that?
Well, I'd like to, bring something up here, and that's basically, I truly enjoyed your presentation there. The Lost Legends of New Jersey. I've not heard of that before, but what a great title.
Yeah, it's a
And
great title.
the quote that you brought from it, I couldn't write the whole quote down, but stories have borders. Very instructive, I think. That was
Yeah.
the nux of it, I think, and it's
Yeah.
very true. And it's something that exploring those borders is something that every writer probably has to go through. And sometimes we maybe go too far and not far enough. So it's just
Yeah,
a matter of
yeah.
trial and error. I also like the references that you had to pinball in there, as it's just easy to get lost in who knows where the random ball is going to end up.
Yeah.
Question about the interplay between Nathan and Nolan Jameson. I take it Nolan is a fictional character based on a real person. Wondered whatever happened to Nolan. Did his
Yeah.
interaction with Bobby Shannon have an effect, and did he turn up okay?
Yeah, actually, it's a good question. The Nolan is an invented character, and it's based on something that I went through in that practice teaching I was doing in Hawaii, where I was challenged in the same way about what good is poetry. And I mentioned this guy that was very much like Bobby Shannon, went to that same high school, Manasquan. I grew up with him. The guy's name was Bobby Myers, and he wasn't a Green Beret, but he was a 101st Airborne paratrooper, Vietnam. He got, totally traumatized by the experience and did start writing poetry. And, he shared some of that with me, and it was really powerful. But then we lost touch. So there the stories diverge. I have no idea what happened to Bobby Myers. I invented what happened to Bobby Shannon. So, that's a little of the backstory. Again, there's that, what I call that indeterminate space, between autobiography and imagination. It can be a pretty wide space or a pretty narrow space, depending on how you're treating it.
Yeah.
And also, Bill, that novel, Frederick Reichen, is Reiken, and I'll send that in the list of books that was brought up before. But it is a great, I think it was his first novel, The Lost Legends of New Jersey. He teaches creative writing, I think at Emerson and Boston, in Boston. But it is a great quote, and I'll add that quote to what I send you. It appears as the as the epigraph for my novel, but I don't expect people to go out and buy the novel, so I'll just send the quote.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
The list of cities that you mentioned along the Jersey Shore really reminded me of what goes on here on the west coast of Florida, because we've got Sarasota blending into Osprey, Nokomis, Venice. It's hard to say exactly where one begins and the other ends and such. So it's very, relatable, I think. Then I wanted to ask you about the poem Just Then, where you were talking about your interaction with a Palestinian. I take it that's just bringing
That's
together,
real.
a real event, but its goal is to bring people together and such then, and show the commonality between two cultures that have been enemies at odds for such a long time. And that is part of the title of your book as well, is it not? Just then,
just then, just there. And that particular poem, in 1977, when I was in Israel for a number of months, and because Anwar Sadat had just gone to Jerusalem, there was a feeling of tremendous optimism and promise and possibility that some of these age-old problems might find some resolution. Clearly, we know that that hasn't been the case. And but that's the spirit I was trying to evoke in that poem, based on a real event. And coincidentally, my wife and I and younger daughter, excuse me, are all going to Israel the end of this month. So it's going to be kind of interesting, because that time of promise in 1977, at least in reading the news, that ain't there anymore.
Yeah.
So it'll be mixed feelings that I go with.
Now, I wanted to mention that it reminded me of something that you've written, Bob, the story about your adventures in Libya and such, it just brought that
wow.
back to me. So
What was that in, Bob?
That's I'm hoping that's going to be in Florida Writers Collections for next year. It's a short story called Spy Boy. And I was using that example. I used my last name in that one because that one is pretty close to exact fact. It's not really far into autobiography. It's not far into fiction. Other stories, I don't use my real name, or I make, have a character's name, where I have gone further into fiction. Gloria's familiar with a story called How I Lost My Lexus. That is greatly embarrassing, to bring up the point Ed was making. I think Ed's read that too. It's highly embarrassing of the protagonist, so I didn't use my actual name in that one. So yeah, but no, that Spy Boy story is true. I was in Tunisia, and I was approached by some government people to travel to Libya to gain some information and take back to them. And their promise was they were going to keep me out of the draft. But I drew a real high number in the draft lottery. So the question is, did they do that, or was it just, unnecessary? That's the ending to that story.
Sounds like a great title. Great title and a great story.
any other comments from anybody? Go ahead, Ed.
Ed,
You're muted. You're muted, Ed.
When I tried to do something autobiographical or a little memoir, whatever it was, I did it in episodic fashion as these memories came to me. So I mean, it was just all over the place. But I put down, I did it specifically to give something, leave something for my boys, and I got about 7,000 words down, and I just, these are things I don't want to reveal. And so I deleted the file. I don't have anything of it either on the computer or on paper. I just deleted it, and it just reached a point where I felt like these are things I'll go to my grave with, and without revealing. So,
so David, I think that by fictionalizing autobiography, you can tell a larger and greater truth.
Yeah.
And
that's true. Yeah, but I didn't want it to be fictional. I wanted it to be as real as I could make it. But then I realized it was too real, and so I just got rid of it.
It's really, I mean, I really relate to what you're saying. And again, it's those choice points. I could add that as a 6th choice point, or any of us could. What do you want to reveal? And another aspect of it, which could be a very instructive separate conversation. When you reveal, who else is implicated? I've got things in my novel that I really worry about. I mean, and I have a close friend from college, for example, and she and I dated when we were in college, but we've remained close friends over the years. She read the novel, and it almost has become a fixation, and what she's trying to pin down is what really happened, or what is fiction. And she even wrote a review of the novel based on that whole question. And then there's the legal issue. You know, what's your exposure? You know, and I mentioned that the novel, you know, came from my meeting with this friend Marty. Well, Marty is his real first name. He's Nathan in the novel. And I worried about that, even though it was just a short meeting and I made up all the rest of his life. He's the only one in our whole circle who ever, you know, took that trajectory. And then this is a horrible thing to say, but I was relieved about a year and a half ago to see that Marty had passed away. So maybe I'm okay. But that seems to be a real danger,
It is.
regardless of what disclaimers you put in. But I guess, you know, novelists deal with that all the time.
Any other comments or questions for David? All right. David, thank you very much. Very illuminating. And I think we've had a nice conversation here. Yeah.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity. It gave me a lot of chance to reflect on, you know, as Harry put it to me, you know, write about or talk about your own writing process. And I had never really thought that much about it until preparing for this. So thank you.
Well, I'll look forward to your email and share that with the group. And I did send out something a little while ago about David's books and that you can access and find out more about him. He has a website that has lots of information there. I want to thank everybody for showing up today. And Eileen, go ahead.
I just had one thought before we go, and it was an Anne Lamott quote. And it goes something like this, paraphrased. Of course, if you didn't want someone to write about you in a negative sense, you should have behaved better.
And Eileen, it includes yourself, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Good.
All right. Very fitting note to end on, right? Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great weekend. And thank you, David. Take care of yourself.
Thank you
David.
all. Take care.
Mhm.
Good luck, everybody. Happy New Year.